Women's STEM careers in college campuses, fact and fiction, next on the Campus Roundup. Hello, I'm Dr. Duke, and this is the Campus Roundup at the College Fix. Our top story segment today focuses on STEM careers and the reasons more women apparently aren't entering the field at the same pace as men. To talk more about this, we welcome Graham PIRO, a staff reporter at the College Fix. Graham, you wrote an interesting story about something going on in CERN, the research institute in Switzerland. Tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. So in late September, Professor Alessandro Strumia, who is a professor at Pisa University in Italy, gave a presentation at CERN where he talked about sexism in the STEM field, and he made a couple of pretty bold claims. He talked about how he believed that men were being discriminated against more than women because of ideology, not because of merit. This talk was met with massive backlash in the scientific community, and a couple days later, CERN suspended Professor Strumia from his position at the research lab. So my story was looking at whether or not there was actually any scientific evidence for what Strumia was saying. And what I found was back in 2015, two Cornell professors had done a study about the fact that there was a ratio of 2-to-1 of preferring women over men in the STEM tenure track line. So my article was looking at whether or not those professors stood by that story and how that related to what Professor Strumia had just experienced.
Well, we see this all across the universities now. Even when there is empirical evidence that a progressive university narrative is wrong, you're not allowed to say that. I think most famously about these rapes culture statistics, right? These universities radically inflating the number of rapes and sexual assaults on campuses. And if you point out if feminist scholars even point out that the statistics don't back that up, all hell breaks loose. Who are these two researchers at Cornell? Tell us a little bit about them and a little about the survey they did.
Sure. So I got in contact with them over email. And like I was saying, the 2015 study essentially found that there was a preference by a ratio of 2-to-1 for hiring women over men in the STEM tenure track. And what I was interested in was whether or not these two professors stood by this study, especially in light of some of the more controversial incidents that we've seen. And when I contacted them by email, they said that they stood by the study, and they said that they hadn't seen anything else that had been published that challenged what they were saying. And most interestingly to me, what part of the study was talking about was that they didn't want this to be construed as something negative. They were saying that it's a great time for women to be going into the STEM field right now. And obviously I don't have any authority when talking about whether or not there actually is, anecdotal evidence of sexism in the field. But what they were stressing in the study and in speaking to me was that this is a really good time for women to be going into the field, and any sort of interpretations to the contrary aren't good.
No, it sounds like these researchers were arguing, like you just said, that these numbers are something to be admired. These are to be welcomed. Did they get any blowback, though, because of the implications of this at Cornell when they wrote it?
Not that they mentioned to me. It seemed like, the reason why I actually found this study to begin with was it was tweeted at about the Strumia story. But when you actually looked at Strumia's presentation slides, which are available on the internet, this study was one thing that he linked to as evidence. And from what the professors were telling me, they did not receive a lot of blowback at the time. And again, they mentioned specifically in the abstract that they thought that the evidence that they came across was a good thing.
Well, and it sounds like Strumia's big mistake was to argue that this preference to hire women in STEM careers, this promotion of women, this argument that women are vastly underrated in STEM careers simply because of sexism, for Strumia to point out that maybe that's not the answer, maybe that's not what the problem is, maybe there is a corollary prejudice against men now to try to right the scales. That's what got him in trouble, it seems.
Yeah, and from what I saw of the BBC's reporting about the presentation was that it was pretty tone deaf. He gave the presentation to a large group of predominantly female young scientists, so maybe it was not the best decision to give the presentation in that sort of context. And he did make a couple of specifically pretty bold claims, statements that he made during the presentation. So yeah, maybe not the best situation for that. But it was interesting to compare that to the other studies that have been done on the subject.
Well, that itself is an interesting commentary, isn't it? That you've got a room full of female scientists, young female scientists at CERN, one of the great research facilities of the world, and the fact that it is almost an all-female audience, tone deaf, no doubt, in terms of pointing that out. But doesn't the audience itself sort of suggest that maybe the professor take away the more outrageous basis of his claims that simply on the numbers, women are doing quite well in STEM?
Yeah, and one of the things I found interesting reporting on the piece was that there was an effort in the scientific community to respond with substantive responses and objections that had citations and were rigorously researched. In fact, one of the websites that I linked to during in the piece was a site called Particles for Justice, which was essentially a massive letter signed by what seemed to me like thousands of researchers that were presenting substantive evidence that objected to Strumia's claims. So, yeah, I mean, like I was saying, it did seem a little tone deaf, but I was at least happy to see that there were attempts to substantively respond to what he was saying and to point out, this study pointed to this fact, but also there are these studies indicating that what he said was wrong. So that was something that I was really interested to read through and look at and include in the piece.
Well, and we should point out, too, that the organization Particles for Justice is itself a political organization by its very title, arguing within the broader confines of scientific research. It's really a fascinating story you've written about, Graham. It has a number of levels, like an onion you peel, and a lot of different cross points. So really, really appreciate you doing that, and we appreciate your time today as well, and we will talk to you again soon. All right, time now for Expert Talk, where we take an opportunity to seek out the opinions of education specialists. Today, I'm joined by Oliver McGee, a university professor, a former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Transportation, an all-around know-it-all kind of guy, a guy who has had experience in public-private academic life. Oliver, the College Fix has done some absolutely necessary and fantastic stories about STEM and the role of women and, to a lesser degree, minorities in STEM careers. As an African-American engineer, professor of engineering, talk a little bit about what got you into STEM careers, and do you believe that it's fair that there is equal opportunity for all when it comes to STEM careers?
Oh, this is an exciting subject for me. I've been dedicated to diversity in STEM fields for many, many decades, several decades. I became an engineer by mentorship. Assistant Dean Minnie McGee at Ohio State. She's the former assistant dean for minority programs. She picked me up out of the classroom and said, "Hey, you have potential in mathematics, and I want to help you." That's really how an African American like myself gets in STEM. And also, I work also with Latino students and women. You're present. You're right in the lives of these kids, and you let them know how you feel about the calculus and then break down the barriers in the calculus with them. I say study the student as much as the subject matter. And that's what I do in my classrooms right now as a role model, and I think, and also as a mentor. And I think that's important for developing both racial and gender equity and diversity in STEM fields, being present.
When you were coming up in your education, it's interesting, it was a woman who actually picked you out and encouraged you in math and STEM careers. As you were coming up and entering the professoriate, did you find more roadblocks or did you find more opportunities for yourself?
Well, another mentor of mine was Dr. Julian M. Earls, who is also a Library of Congress history maker like myself. He was the director of NASA Glenn Research Center. So he was a black engineer, a black role model for me. And I found that, in answer to your question, those barriers still exist. They are just been transferred from Dr. Earl's generation to my generation. There is still a glass ceiling for us. I myself negotiate my career in engineering with a glass ceiling on top of me.
Talk too about the role of women. There's a long debate about women in STEM careers. Have STEM careers historically been hostile to women? In your role as an educator, do you get a lot of female students in your classes? Is something that at the university you teach at? I know there's a lot of outreach going on for these kinds of kids, for non-traditional kids in STEM careers. But in your own classrooms, what are you seeing with female applicants and female engineers?
Well, in mechanical engineering, it's low. And women tend to go towards environmental engineering because they want to build their communities and make them clean and safe for their families. But we do need to build more women presence in engineering. It's a barrier field because it involves physics and calculus and a lot of the natural sciences that are barriers sometimes to cross over when they're trying to put the weed out system in the system to get the best and brightest in engineering. So we have to work on that, and that's also being present at the creation with women. But at the same time, gender and racial barriers exist in the STEM fields in relatively same orders. And that's really what we need to be thinking about, how and who participates in the future of answering some of the future questions in science and technology. And more importantly, are they exposed to those questions? And that's really the real key that we're looking at in meeting America's needs for the scientific and technological challenges of the 21st century. And that's a report that I wrote and turning into a book for President Clinton's initiative on race, that we were looking at that question in looking at the race conversation under President Clinton's White House.
At the lower levels, before college, what do you see? Are there some things you can identify that would prohibit or discourage minorities and women from entering STEM careers? It seems like the programs are open to everybody. The kids who take the science classes in late, middle, and high school, though they're certainly not weeding out girls from those classes. What can be done then to try to raise awareness, particularly for female students moving forward?
Well, as a history maker, we are asked to go back to high school every year to try to encourage students on the role of education, but also as a STEM worker, I go back as a STEM person to tell them what I did in STEM and what they can do in STEM. And that's catching kids at an early part of their sophomore, junior, and senior year when they're making college choices and they're making choices about their vocation. They're actually right at that point thinking about that. And I think also there is girls programs that are in the 8th grade levels that are coming out of the National Science Foundation, which are very productive. Many of the P-CASE winners that I've worked with in the National Science Foundation, and I was at NSF PYI, many times the women winners were working with persons like myself to go into the 8th grade levels and to be able to encourage them with math projects and science projects to get them interested in math and science. So that's working the pipeline because that's what the colleges depend on. And many of the college first year experience programs are beginning to look at this very, very carefully. And more the best colleges like Ohio State University that I had experience with, they make sure that that first year experience is very, very rich and involving retention of women and minorities.
Oliver McGee, thank you so much for your time and insight today. Hope to talk to you again soon. Some great input there from Graham PIRO, whose wonderful article sheds light on a very complicated issue, and Oliver McGee giving us some real insight on what it's like to be a minority in STEM careers. For my final fix, I'd simply like to point out that we are in a very dangerous time in this country. The article in the news today suggests that according to the ACT, who tests our college kids, our kids are performing at the lowest level on math in the last 20 years. Our kids are regressing in their mathematical ability. Less than 50%, well less than 50% of American kids, it's in the 30s, are able to do college-level math right away when they get to college. What we need to do is to provide, as Oliver said, the most opportunities possible for us to identify those kids who have that math gift in math and science. It doesn't matter what their races or their genders are. Let's find those kids who are the best qualified to begin math at a high level, and let's promote and push them. I do think that in time, if we do that, seek out the best math brains and provide opportunities for them, we're going to get better mathematics and science programs. That's the way we want to handle it moving forward, and that's the final fix. Be sure to stay up on all the latest news and information from the College Fix by joining us on all of our social media platforms. For the Campus Roundup, I'm Dr. Duke, and we will see you next time.